The stars are bright, we own the night. The stars are bright, we own. The stars are bright, we own the night. The stars are bright, we own. The
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, how you doing?
I am doing wonderful. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's Friday, and I love Fridays.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
a big Friday.
loving
So,
it.
how are you?
I'm doing okay, enjoying my maternity leave.
Oh, I'm so happy for you. I know a little bit of the story from what you've put out, so congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Welcome to No Better Time Than the Present. This is your girl, Yolanda, myeloma chick. And today I'm very excited for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. We have the lovely Dr. Tiana Rogers. Okay, so Dr. Tiana established Mended Hope in order to provide mentorship, support, and encouragement needed to release every woman from the life disappointments and insecurities. Mended Hope's signature Thrive Academy for personal and professional development is an evidence-based and outcome-focused process designed to help high-achieving women build resilience and flourish despite adversity. And we all need that, may I add. Dr. Tiana is a 2017 Outstanding Young Minnesotans Awardee, 2020 Visionary Leadership Awardee, and Utah Business Magazine 2021 Inspirational Leader Awardee. She believes that you are not meant to just survive, but thrive and help others do the same. Her greatest hope is that you too are reminded of your power as a woman and take the necessary steps to continue your journey to the life of your dreams, full of faith and with mended hope. Thank you, Dr. Tiana.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me, Yolanda.
So, I actually, just a little pre-story, I met your husband at AACR, I think just before the pandemic. So
Okay.
I'm going to say 2019 because it was a lot going on 2019.
Yeah.
And he, along with some other doctors and stuff like that, and I just liked his whole take in terms of getting basically yourself checked out, you know,
Yeah.
how important that was. So
Mm-hmm.
he was very push hard with that. And I kind of appreciated that little conversation that I had because I think each participant, we had like a short time with the doctors and the scientists and all of that. So that was kind of cool. And I think over time, I've kind of like been bugging him. And I think he's the one who told me to reach out to you because I was trying to find, well, where's that email or whatever. So that's kind of where the connection comes in.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, okay, so first, let me get my little questions up here. So, okay, first, let's start off. As I said in the beginning, this is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Let's start with what is your story and how did you get into this space of advocacy?
Ooh, yeah. So I got into the space of advocacy initially because of my husband, because he is a cancer researcher and his particular focus is colon cancer. And so a lot of his research lends itself to advocacy. And because we work in similar spaces, we partnered a lot on his research. And so I found myself writing a lot of research articles and op-eds, really highlighting what the implications are for the research, what are the takeaways, what policy changes should be made to make sure that cancer victims or cancer survivors, but also cancer care advocates, care providers and advocates could really change this landscape. And so that was kind of the start and introduction. And then in February of 2020, I was actually diagnosed with early onset breast cancer at 34 with no history, no family history, no genetic marker or genetic reason why I got it so early. And at the time I was, well, I've always, since my late teens, early 20s, been kind of a health enthusiast. So working out 5-6 times a week. At that time I was eating mostly vegan because my husband and I were family planning. So we were trying to have a baby. And yeah, I found a lump one day and ultimately called my provider about it. And they were like, you know, give it a few days and then, you know, if it's still there, give us a call back. And ended up kind of forgetting about it, which a lot of us busy women can do very easily. And my husband remembered and he's like, hey, is that mass still there? Like, what's going on with that? And I felt around for it and it was still there. And so I called back and they said, we will get you in today. They got me in. I had kind of a physical exam and they, the provider that I actually had, she said, you know, my training would actually tell me to tell you to watch and wait because you are so young. You're not 40. You don't have any family history. But she said, but I learned through some recent training that Black women, particularly under 40, are getting diagnosed with breast cancer at higher rates. And when they do get diagnosed, it's generally more aggressive. It's further along. And so she said, I don't feel comfortable doing that. She said, I want to send you right away for a biopsy and we want to, you know, make sure that it is not cancerous. And so within a few days, I was able to get in and get scanned and have all the exams and the biopsies. And then February 10th of 2020 was the day that I received my diagnosis of stage 2 estrogen positive breast cancer.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was a journey, as you can imagine. It was, my surgery was scheduled the beginning of March. And it was literally like 2 or 3 days before the university where I work was shut down and before the world was shut down. So I was going through recovery. I ended up having a lumpectomy, which is where they just remove the mass from the breast, so to preserve the breast. And then I had 24 rounds of radiation during the pandemic as well. So I had to go through that by myself. My husband was so amazing. He would drive me to the hospital, the cancer hospital, every day for my appointments and wait for me, you know, outside. And then from there, I ended up doing, I actually had to do fertility preservation in that process because they weren't sure if I would have to do traditional chemotherapy, which is kind of the port, kind of the process that most people think of when they think of chemo, where your hair falls out and all these other things are happening. But thankfully, I ended up not having to do the traditional chemo. I ended up doing a less invasive, which they call oral chemo. So it's a pill that you take that helps make sure that the cells don't regenerate in that spot. So I did chemo for a little over a year. And then my providers were comfortable with me coming off of the chemo in order to attempt to have a baby. So, so we succeeded, and I have my little nugget, and he is 7 weeks old now. So I've been up pregnant.
Oh man.
Yeah. So it was it's been a whirlwind, you know. It's hard to kind of put your story in that way in such a succinct kind of timeline when I think about it. All were just in 2022, and I was diagnosed in 2020. So a lot has happened
Yeah, like to go through that, I can like to go through cancer just in general is, as you say, a whirlwind.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
However, to do it in the time of the pandemic, I
yeah,
can just imagine for a lot of people that's like such an empty space because you're doing it by yourself. You know, to some degree, at least when
yeah,
you go to the whatever facility,
yeah,
and that's a bit much.
yeah,
You know what I'm saying? I know for
yeah,
me, when I started my journey, like my husband, he would come with me to those early appointments. You
yeah,
know, I think he was there for the first chemo. Actually, I don't think he was there with the first chemo, but he was there. Let's just put it that he was there.
yeah, yeah,
So I couldn't imagine, especially 2020, because we know how crazy that was.
yeah,
Okay. Thought the
hmm,
apocalypse is amongst us. Okay.
yeah.
And you're going into this space where everyone is like extra cautious. It's just a weird spot to be. So I can just imagine how scary
Yeah.
that was for you.
Yeah, yeah, it was scary. It was definitely, I think oftentimes when we hear the word cancer, we think death.
Mhm.
Right? Like that's just kind of our human nature and how society has kind of structured it. And so, to be in that space and to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to navigate this whole thing. Um, Largely, like you said, on my own. But I think that in retrospect, there were also some really, really great things that came out of it, particularly because the pandemic really allowed not just me, but I feel like people in general to just slow down,
Mhm.
and to really tune in, right, and really understand and recognize what was important and what was not important. And so I think for me, it was really, being a researcher, working at a top research institution, and then having my own business, and then having also another business with my husband, consulting business. It's like we were so into the things, right? Like we were just doing all the things and busy, and the same kind of story that everyone has of like, oh my God, I have so much to do and I'm so busy, and I'm climbing this corporate ladder to success. And I think when cancer happened and the pandemic happened at the same time, it really forced um, me to turn inward and to just slow down and be like, okay, this is important. And I now, realize that cancer is really a symptom of something else happening in your body. And so for me, it was a, it was a huge undertaking to really get clear and get quiet enough to be like, what is happening? Where is the imbalance? Why am I having a hormone positive breast cancer? One thing that really struck me, I went in for my genetic testing and checked the testing results, and the provider said, we've ruled out everything. Like you don't have any risk factors, as they would say. You're not a smoker, you're not a bad eater, you're not overweight, you work out, all of these things. And so what she said was, because we can rule out those things and we can rule out genetics, we know that it's environmental.
Mhm.
And so she said it can either, and so then me, as a researcher, I'm like, well, where is the data? I want to see it. I want to know. I
Right,
need to know,
exactly.
yeah. And so what she kind of explained was, she's like, well, we don't know, like we can't pinpoint and say, oh, you lived next to a nuclear plant, or had this in your environment growing up. But she was like, it tends to point to something happening right in your space, and that could be current, it could be past. And so it made me really start thinking about the things that I put in my body. It made me think about the level of stress that I have in my life, right? Like as I was going through treatment, my oncologist kept saying, Tiana, stress makes cancer cells grow.
Yes.
And it was, it was like, oh, I've been having stress for my whole life, and so it was little things like that I think, had I not been in the middle of a pandemic, I don't know that I would have been still enough and quiet enough to really pay attention to.
Right. It's funny because you said some good points in terms of, you're busy, especially if you're of a particular age, right? We're the go-getters. We want to do this. We want to do that. We want to climb. We want to be successful.
Yeah.
However, with that, while we're climbing, we also notice that we get stressed,
Yeah.
So I said before, my history and profession used to be in the fashion industry, which was way hella stressful.
Yeah.
Trying to climb the corporate structure, along as being one of the few Black women, in a lot of these companies.
Yeah.
So it was just a lot. And it's like, I wrote an article a few years ago in terms of, I feel like, when your body is stressed, you have all of these anxieties, these triggers, this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
I can recall so many times sitting at my desk and just feeling the stress just eat at me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, oh, I'm so stressful. But then you still continue doing whatever it is that you're doing, right? Like, okay, you get over it. But then that's your initial trigger as to, this may lead into something down the line.
Yes.
Surprise.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, totally.
So so I'm going to hit you up with a couple of questions.
Okay.
What do you think, for Black women specifically, why we're more affected? And when we look at the survival rate within breast cancer, obviously any woman of any ethnicity is affected. But what is it with Black women specifically that seems to be a trigger of survival rate, do you think?
Okay, so the research is still exploring this. What we do know currently about the research is that, yes, Black women are getting it. They're outpacing every other racial group for getting breast cancer under 40. And I think that when it comes to survival, what we do know just based on historical data is that there are many factors such as education. So lack of knowledge is a huge barrier for us. Family secrets, right? Like people not sharing and being open and transparent about their history. So even for myself, when I had my genetic testing, my staff person said, because you had this so young, you need to talk to your sisters. I have 3 younger sisters. And she said, you need to tell them to tell their providers that they have a sister who had early onset, because by protocol, they should start getting screened 10 years before you were diagnosed. So if I'm diagnosed at 34, they need to start getting screened at 24. Right. So it's those type of things. And I immediately left the appointment and called all my sisters, and I'm like, hey, you need to make sure you tell them this the next time you go in. And so I think that it's, I think that there's sometimes this feeling of shame when you are diagnosed. Like it's like, oh my gosh, what, particularly for me to hear like it's not genetic and it's not that I'm doing anything like as far as risk factors. So then it's like, well, what else am I doing to cause this to happen in my body, And so I think that there's this level of shame where people feel like, oh, this is my fault. I brought this on myself. And so they don't want to share with other people, and they don't want to tell them, what's happening or what's going on. But particularly for Black women, there are there's the BRCA gene, right, where it's genetic, and there are so many Black women who have the genetic marker that don't know that they have it.
Right.
So their moms, their grandmothers, their aunts, like no one shared. Like I can think of so many instances where like people die in families and people are like, well, what did they die from? And then it's like, oh,
Wow.
we don't know. You know, people were kind of hush hush about it, you know, and so it's like you're just left without this information. And it's really, you know, I tell people all the time, like family secrets take out generations, you know, so
Mm-hmm.
when you're not being open and transparent about these things, they can cause major problems. So those are top two things. I also think that when we think about just structural racism, right? Not race,
Right.
racism, right?
Mhm.
Those things that play out in systems of care, in healthcare, in insurance, right? Lack of insurance is a huge barrier for women being able to get care. And so when you talk about some of these practices, you know, like there's research that specifically says that a lot of practitioners and providers don't believe Black women when they come in
Mhm.
and they say that they have an ailment or something hurts, or, you know, there's not always this sense of urgency to address their needs, and there's not always a sense of confidence on our part to really advocate for ourselves and say, no, I know something is wrong, you need to, you know, take a second look, or I'm firing you as my doctor and I'm going to find a
Mhm.
different provider because that's my prerogative, right? So I think in a lot of these instances, we lose as Black women because we don't have the information, we don't have um, the advocacy, we don't have systems that are designed for us to thrive and to live healthy lives. And so when you have those things stacked against you, it makes it a lot harder, you know, to overcome um, illness and chronic disease.
Right. Kudos, because it's funny because my grandmother, maternal grandmother, she died of breast cancer. So we didn't really have really within the family, there wasn't a lot of people who had cancer per se. You
Mm-hmm.
know, with either the high blood pressure or the sugars, and
Yeah.
the Black community know it as, and those type of things. So
Yeah.
when she died, it's funny because I found something of hers not that long ago, and I was like, I thought she was so and so age, but she was rather young. She was like 59 when she
Oh,
died.
wow. Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's always been like, you have a conversation with your doctor. If you have a good doctor who asks those questions, and
Yeah.
most do, because that's like a general, anybody in your family had this or that or whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
I know my GYN, she was like, oh, well, how old was I? I think I was in my early 30s when it was like, okay, well, you're going to have to go for a mammogram. And it's like, well, isn't that when you're 40 or 50 or something? And she was like, well, no, because since your grandmother,
Yeah.
expired and stuff with this disease, you just have to do what you got to do. So
Yeah.
I was like, just think, just as yourself, you're young, like, why are we going through this? But like you did it, you know what I'm saying? So that's kind of what I did so many years when like friends now are like, oh my God, I'm doing my first mammogram. I'm like, girl, please. I've been to that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like, it's funny because here we try to keep an eye at the possibilities, even though it's still on the table. God forbid, anything else pops on. But
Mm-hmm.
then here now for me, I have like the blood cancer issue. So
Yeah.
it wasn't the breast cancer, it was something else. And
Yeah.
it's okay. And that reminds me of what you just said in terms of if you didn't have some of these checklists, what could it be? Environmental, possibly, because there's so much going on with our world.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it kind of just now puts anybody really at risk, I think, whether it's hereditary or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah.
So So, have you found that using your voice within the breast cancer community has helped people understand the importance of self-exams or in questioning when something doesn't seem right?
I would hope so. I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure. What I do know though is that in the healthcare system, they actually are advising against self-exams. My provider actually told me this maybe a year or so ago, and she's like, we don't even encourage those really anymore. Like they don't, the research is suggesting that they're not as effective. And even for myself, when I found my lump, I was not doing a self-exam. It just happened to be on the top of my breast, like kind of right under my collarbone. So there was not a lot of skin there. So it just kind of was more noticeable, it protruded out a lot more. So I think that I would hope, I'll say, that my speaking out is helping folks to recognize that the reality is that your providers have a lot of patients, but you're your only patient. And you have to become an expert, right? And you have to, I think for so many of us, particularly Black women, we are encouraged and sometimes conditioned, I'll say, to not listen to our inner voices and to kind of overlook and override those instinctual things that we just know, even if we can't pinpoint how we know it, you know, there are just these things that we're like, yeah, that's not normal, or I don't feel at ease about that, right? And so I would say, you know, return to that, start practicing listening to that voice or that instinct or that gut check, whatever you call it, because it's usually leading you to higher ground. And it's usually, and you're not, at least for me, when I've ever followed my gut or my instinct, I've never regretted it. It's always led me to the place where I needed to be. And so I think being able to feel confident that you are the expert of your own body. And if someone doesn't listen to you, if your doctor is not listening to you, know that you have the right to fire them and ask for a new doctor, you know, ask or leave that network and go to a different health network, you know. And I know sometimes that can be limited depending on insurance and things like that, but there are still a variety of advocacy groups. They have what do they call them? Like patient navigators in a lot of healthcare systems, you know, so they can help you navigate these things or have these tough conversations if changing providers is just not an option for you. So I would say, you know, even now, to encourage someone to just know that you always have options. Even if you feel like you're limited because of money, because of resource, because of insurance, just know that you have options and there is a way.
I totally agree. It's so funny to have you say, from a doctor, everyone, okay, it's okay to fire your doctor if the conversations don't seem to be going, you know, the way it should be going. And I think a lot of us, which I've said this before, some of us get intimidated, you know, and we think, oh, well, this person knows what they're talking about. But in actuality, it has to be a partnership.
Yes.
And something as important as being diagnosed with any type of cancer is a big deal.
Yes.
So it can't just be a one-sided relationship. You know, this has to be both ways. You kind of think of it as a marriage to some degree. Okay. So it's just not you yapping, I'm yapping too. Okay, so we got to do this together.
Yeah. And I would say too, you know, there's also a responsibility that comes that we don't always accept as patients, right? Like there's a level of ownership that when I was diagnosed, like I talked to everyone that I could, you know, people that I knew, colleagues that I knew that worked in breast cancer space. I was like getting on the phone with them. I was asking them questions. I was getting books. I was reading different research articles. Like I really knew that I needed to get up the curve on this topic because my expertise as a doctor is not cancer. right? And I've never had breast cancer. And so it was one of those things of like, oh, I gotta get up to speed too, you know, so that I can have thoughtful conversations about this so that I know what questions to even ask when I go, right? Like sometimes you don't even know the way that the process sometimes moves. It moves really quickly after diagnosis. You know, they want to move right to treatment. And so sometimes you don't even know the questions that you want to ask, and you don't always feel like you have the time or the space to ask those questions. And so I think that there has to be a responsibility on your part as well, if you are diagnosed, to learn what your options are. I also did a lot of exploring in holistic medicine. And so I ended up working with a classical homeopath during my treatment. And so many times, like I can't even count how many times my providers would be like, what are you doing at home? Why don't you have side effects? Why, you know, why is this not affecting you? Like we usually see this and we usually see that. And every time I would go in for my checkups, I'd be like, nope, not experiencing that. Nope, I didn't have that, you know? And they were just like, what's happening, you know? And so I think that understanding that, yes, Western medicine is a resource, and I am thankful to science. However, I also feel that there are other health and wellness modalities that are important to me and that I value and that align with what are priorities in my own life. And so I did a combination of both. Right. And it's a decision that I feel super confident about, and I feel like it aligned with what I valued. And it wasn't always in alignment with what my providers recommended. And I was okay with that because I respected their expertise, and I did hear them, and I weighed their expertise with what I felt was important and necessary in my own life.
Right. It's funny because earlier on, is something going on with this thing? Okay, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay. Earlier on, there was, okay, what's the alternative route? But just like I said before, that's where it's important to have that relationship with your medical team, your doctor, to say, well, you know what, I'm thinking about doing this over here. What do you think?
Yeah.
And just having that conversation, it shouldn't be a secretive thing or something on your mind, but you don't verbally, be vocal about what it is that you're thinking. A lot of the stuff that I wanted to play with, which I did, which some did not work well, like all those numbers kind of acting funky. It was like, but my doctor, he was like, you know what, go for it.
Yeah.
You okay, if this is basically going to shut you up, it just got to do that. but it was cool because, again, it was that whole being vocal with your doctor, not just you telling me I have to do A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Let me have a voice in this if there's some other things that I can think about. Like think if I change my diet, whether the diet is effective or not. But that's the thing when it comes to cancer, any cancer. The complexity, everyone is so different.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So something may work wonders, and some people are like, oh my God, what's happening? Who knows whether if that's a genetic thing, and maybe you needed that medication to kind of help put you in alignment. Like there's so much stuff that we don't know. But I think a lot of people, when they hear the word cancer, automatically they just, which I get it, because I think we've both been there, but you really have to get your game up when it comes to this whole advocacy. Simple as having a transparent conversation with your doctor.
Yeah, for sure.
So, okay, I was listening to one of your IG posts on Mended Hope, and you did something which was interesting. You did a great reflection on Thrive Nation and coping with life disruption while thriving. Can you break down briefly those 4 tips and how they relate for people coping with breast cancer or any
Oh
cancer.
my gosh, I don't even remember those. Oh,
I should have gave you the heads up, but I forget when you posted it. I want to say maybe it was earlier in the year.
it had to be because I moved across the country earlier this year, and then I had my baby, so I have not done much content this year at all.
Well, okay, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but just
No,
as
it's totally fine.
just give me one off the top of your head.
For thriving through disruption, I would say the number one thing would be trying to think of what was the number one influential thing for me. My circle was so important. And so even when I was diagnosed, my husband and I had really in-depth conversations, even around like who we were going to tell, because there are some things that need to be guarded. And when you're going through literally a battle for your life, when you are in a battle for something like cancer, it's important that you protect your energy, and it's important that you recognize that not everyone can handle the news.
Oh my God, yes,
right?
you better preach.
Yeah. And so I thank God even to this day for that wisdom, because I was very clear that there were some people that if I told, that I would then feel responsible for managing their reaction, for managing their emotions around it. Like I knew that this was going to be an emotional and a spiritual battle just as much as it was a physical battle. And so I needed people who were anchored emotionally to be like, no, we're going to stand with you. We're going to pray with you. We're going to rally. We're going to support you. Whatever it is that you need, we are going to fill in the gap for you, right? And there are just some people in our lives, and they can be some of the closest people to you, that just cannot handle. They just can't handle it. And so I didn't want to be responsible for that. I was already carrying enough. And so what we did is we created a private Facebook group, and we had just our close friends and family in this group. And it was a way for us to be able to share updates with everyone at the same time. So we didn't have to worry about a million phone calls and a million, text messages and people, wanting to come and see you when you're going through treatment. Like we didn't want our space to be, we wanted to protect our space. And so we were like, okay, this is the boundary. This is who we're allowing in this space. These are the things that we need from this circle of people that we trust and love. And so I think making sure that our circle was tight and making sure that we had people who were anchored again emotionally to help us endure this time was so critical. It was so critical because when people start to, I've watched other people go through this and they share it with everyone. And if you want to do that, that's your prerogative. But one of the things that was super important to me was that I didn't need pity. And I knew that there were some people who you could tell and they would just give you that, oh,
Right.
And it was like, I don't need your pity. Like, I just need your prayers. And if you're a person of faith and you're willing to throw some up for me, then I'll take it, And so I would say when you're going through any type of life disruption, it's important to guard your circle and make sure that you know who is in that space and know that just the way life is structured, you can only be really deeply devoted to a select few. And so that group and that circle is not going to be everyone. And that's okay. And that's okay. And you may have a lot of people in it, you know, and that's good too. But I think just being thoughtful and intentional about that is really what has helped me through breast cancer and many other life disruptions.
I think you hit that perfect, to be honest with you. Because I've said this before, like, that was a battle. Who do you tell? You know, and sometimes, yeah, you may have a lot of people in your network, but then sometimes you have to think it's the quality, not the quantity. So
Mm-hmm.
you sit here and tell the whole world, and some people, you get a mixture. You get a
Mm-hmm.
mixture of the nosies. Are you still breathing, girl? Or you get
Yes.
those who are praying for you, who are checking on you, or you get those who know but kind of have just moved on with their life. Oh,
Yes.
girl, I'm so sorry. I've been so busy. So that's kind of, well, maybe you shouldn't have known in the first place. You know what I'm saying? Because
Yep.
it's the whole mental thing as you battle what
Yep.
you're battling. So I totally with that.
Yeah.
Totally. So as we almost wrap this up,
Okay.
okay, what are two of your favorite foods when things are not aligned in your positive space that you like to eat? Remember, you're going to get your eat on in a few minutes. So,
My favorite things. I'm trying to think. I really love Snickers.
mm,
The little bite-sized ones so that I
yeah.
don't feel as bad. Those are some of my favorites. And I'm trying to think of what's something that I actually like really eat often. I actually really like granola bars.
So do I.
Just the
Oh, you
plain.
like health? Well, the Snickers isn't really healthy, but yeah, the granola, okay.
Yeah, I find myself kind of snacking on those a lot. When I was pregnant, I didn't really like them that much, but now that before I got pregnant, I ate them a lot, and now I eat them pretty often too. So they're like my breastfeeding snack.
Look
So,
at that.
yeah.
So as we wrap this up, what parting words would you tell those who are newly diagnosed with breast cancer?
Mm, wow. I would say, feel what you need to feel because you are going to have all the feels when you are first diagnosed. Um, but then recognize that cancer is a word and not a sentence.
Mm,
And there is life on the other side of it. And if you just believe that it can get better, that you will get better, that you will find a new normal, um, that you'll persevere. Reach out to those who have already taken the journey. As you mentioned earlier, it may not always look the same, but there are still these common threads of the experience, and there's still this shared sense of dread when you are told that you have cancer, right? Like that is like a lived experience that so many of us can relate to. And so I think just being able to process it, giving yourself space and time to process the reality of like where you are, and that this is real, and then getting the support that you need to walk out that journey is really, really critical. And again, that may look different for everyone. I know in my experience, there was lots of encouragement to like join like support groups and join
mm,
like Facebook groups. And everyone that I joined, I left immediately
mm.
because they did not resonate with my mental, and they just felt like doom and gloom. And I was like, that's not good for my mental health. The other thing that I would say is find a good therapist or counselor,
Mhm.
because my therapist was so helpful in helping me recognize that feelings aren't fact.
Right.
And that just because I feel a certain way, you
Mm-hmm.
know, doesn't make it true, right? And so being able to have someone objectively help me explore those feelings and explore those different beliefs that I held about my experience with cancer was super helpful. And it just helped me feel like I was moving through it in a way that allowed me to not succumb to the kind of, I would say, kind of outside pressures of, you know, how people view cancer and how they treat you sometimes, even when they know you have cancer.
Right.
And so, yeah, those would be kind of the major things. Like, know that you got this, get the right village around you, reach out for support, don't feel any shame about it, and get a good therapist.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful tips. Wonderful tips. So I really appreciate, you really do not know that you took the time this evening to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
How can our network find you and your services and all of that good stuff?
Yes, you can connect with me on Instagram at Mended Hope or Mended_Hope, or you can find us on Facebook. We have Mended Hope page on Facebook, or you can check out our site and connect with me there, and that's mendedhope.org.
Wonderful. Yay! So everyone, we'll have the replay up sometime next week. Dr. Tiana will talk afterwards. I'll shoot you an email and all of that good stuff. But
Okay.
again, everyone, I really appreciate the support with this series. This has been a great year. We have some good things in store for 2023. So hang in there, stay with us. Next month is Lung Cancer Awareness Month. So we have the advocate, Jamie Jams Bowles. So she'll be our guest, and we're excited to speak with her. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, you too.
And cheers. Congratulations.
Thank you. Good luck with the rest of your series.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone.
Bye.